next guests are Ben Aranda, of New York and Tucson-based Aranda Lasch, and his partner in crime for their Another Circle installation, Dorian Bybee of, forgive me if I'm Ellettsville-based Bybee Stone. And you have an architecture background as well, coming from, you studied architecture, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so, how did that inform the collaboration between your local stone manufacturing company and the Aranda Lasch from New York and Tucson?
Morning, Matt.
Good morning.
It made us very excited to work with them. So we can start there.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait, you're from this town, right?
That's right.
Where are you from?
I'm from a town much like this town, but in Wisconsin.
Oh, really?
Not to say that all Midwest towns are the same, because they're not, despite what people on the coast might think.
So, how is this working out? Exhibit Columbus, from your perspective?
I think it's really great. It's interesting to see this kind of group of people come here and interface with the local community the way it has been, and not just like what Dwayne was saying, not just kind of impose itself, but sort of blend in, and also it doesn't feel like a new thing that breaks from the past. It feels like it really feels like it is a continuation of a legacy that maybe the building stopped, but I don't think that the kind of community and some of the things that brought about the building ever stopped being here. There's that part, people have misinterpreted this part of the Columbus movie about meth and modernism. And there were some sensational headlines about meth and modernism, that was what they captured. And I think that's really, really, it would be a really, really easy reading of it at first glance, but there's a whole lot of community, and there's a really strong progressive streak here that never went away, even though they aren't building this in the same way. And that's continued, and I think your project probably is like a part of this.
Well, do you think that the local community is seeing it that way? I'm just curious. I'm super curious.
I don't know. It's hard for me to really say that. I don't know. It's also maybe too early to tell. I mean, we haven't I'm not sure a lot of people have fully engaged with it, but I do know that people are excited about it, and I haven't heard a lot of like xenophobia about it, which is good.
I think from just a larger Midwest conversation.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, we've been talking like, oh, it doesn't look like it was just placed there, or it's not from the outside. I think there's, again, just to be a defender of the Midwest, the Midwest can do contemporary. We're going to talk about it more later. I mean, the Midwest did modernism when even the coast didn't. I mean, there's modernism on the coast, but like, it was a real thing here. I mean, that's how we built Midwest cities. They're on a grid that they took from Jefferson and then just made. So it's like, no, they're not from outside, because this is what the Midwest is. The Midwest is experimentation. The Midwest is doing these things.
There were certain utilitarian aspects of Midwestern colloquial architecture that inspired a lot of this.
Right.
So, no, it's not something that's new to Columbus, and Columbus has been a part of that discussion. It's wonderful to see that it's getting a greater voice in that discussion again.
Mm-hmm.
It deserves it.
Yeah, I've been fascinated by this regional innovation in architecture. I mean, like a lot of architects, I had heard of Columbus. I had seen a couple of the buildings, but I didn't know that they were in such concentration when I came here for the first time, which was last year, and didn't realize that there was such a focus. At a certain moment in time, there was a real focus in producing very forward-looking civic work, and when you do relate it to other cities in the Midwest, like Chicago and a certain, I mean, you can look at Chicago as the birthplace of the modern metropolis, of the skyscraper, and a lot of the innovations that came to produce a building like that. You begin to realize, you start to connect the dots that that this region actually is this fountain of not just like architectural invention, but really ideas about how to live and how to, I don't know, like how to, yeah, how to bring the community together. I mean, I think it's really, that's what's this project, you know, which is called Another Circle, and it's called Another Circle because there's a big circle on our site, which is this lake. It was that. It was a kind of wager in seeing how to bring people together for the project and through the project, through the building of it. So, you know, I can say, like, you know, we when we came down here initially with my partner Joaquin Bonifaz, we traveled kind of around the area, and one thing we were just blown away by was how many buildings are actually made out of limestone here. It's actually crazy, and it's not just like civic buildings, homes, pawn shops, delis, you know, middle schools, everything had limestone. I mean, when you go up near your quarry, it seemed relentless, almost like, yeah, almost like the earth had just erupted all of these buildings from the ground, and it was beautiful. And so we thought, okay, we have to obviously do something out of limestone because it'll resonate. And you know, luckily we got in touch with Dorian, who you said something that really resonated early in the project, which is you said, look, we believe in the public good, so we'll help your project if it's about that. And that was the kind of, that's what sort of we realized, like, look, if we tap into this material and use it in a way that that resonates, then we'll start this process of having a conversation with the community, and also really testing out this idea of the Columbus way.
There's the project seems to, I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't, there's certain sort of paradoxes to it that are, I think that, you know, once you come to it, everyone's going to have to deal with, not deal with, that sounds negative, but it's made out of stone, right? Like, it's a lithic project, which usually, and it's a circle, so we think of, you know, timeless, and when you see a Midwest, and it's always Indiana limestone, Chicago is Indiana limestone too, it has to do a ton with permanence. But the project, these are stones that can be held, and there's things that are stacked, which are still standing, but may not, there's teenagers in this town, so I imagine things, like, what is that conversation about time? Because I think there's because the conversation of getting together isn't about necessarily monuments, but about activities that happen over a period of time, and the grass is going to be beat down in patterns eventually. The fastest way to get to the water through it. Sure. You know, so what is that thought about time and this changing, and some of the earlier images we just have stills here are, you know, things moving.
I mean, you know, it's imagined as a very kind of open structure, not just in its kind of porosity. I mean, it allows a lot of landscape in, but it's meant to allow the people in as well, and it's meant to be something that's used and reinterpreted for use. So used in ways that we can't predict right now. And you know, in reference to this idea of timelessness, you know, we were wondering, like, what do we do with all these pieces of stone? So Dorian, we had early on in the project, we had called Dorian and we said, you know, do you have any stone that you're not using? And Dorian sent us this photograph right outside of their mill of a hill that was about 40 feet tall.
Taller, unfortunately.
Oh, really? Now it's probably going every day or that. And Dorian said, well, this is all our sort of unused limestone. You know, you can use whatever you want from there. And we realized, like, you know, wow. So really, we have there's so much we can do, but you have to accept its imperfections. You have to you know, basically deal with what it is, and how the industrial process and how any decay has left these stones for what they are. So, so in that sense, the construction process became really interesting because it was about how do you organize basically a mountain of refuse, and you know, and that's where a lot of our effort went into. I mean, the actual it looks quite. You talk about this kind of timeless or whatever. I mean, it looks quite primitive when you see it. It's just very simple stacks. Some of them are laid into the ground. Some of them just rest in there. But every stone was placed very precisely using a GPS device. There were no standard construction equipment there. There was no tape measures. There were no levels. There were no lasers. There was no strings, like any of the usual things that you need to place things in space. Instead, we worked with Taylor Brothers, and we basically figured out a way where they could walk around with these stones and phones and basically place the rocks precisely, and they would also know how to build it up.
We joked on the phone, this is kind of the world's largest 3D printed built work, you know, in a sense, and yet it looks so primitive. But I always thought from the beginning that there was a sense of intentionality to this project that was really interesting, particularly because you compare it to where these stones were going. So they were going to just be dumped in that hill, right? And even though they're kind of scattered in the landscape, when you compare them to what they would have been, they're actually in some ways more intentional than a building, you know, because it's been so precisely and thoughtfully designed and placed. So I thought that was an interesting aspect. Yeah.
Would it be, you know, these installations, it's always sort of fuzzy about what will happen to them. I'm sure the city has ideas of what will happen with stuff. Would you be happy or excited if these ended up as pavers in people's gardens? You know, I mean, like,
Yeah.
Like that's what it seems like. They're gonna make someone's steps in their backyard someday, right? Or they'll stay there.
That's some creative thinking, man.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like, I'm wondering, or like the Park Service is like, oh, we should make our own pile at some point.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's been a range of ideas about what to do with it, but it's definitely there to be reused and to find another life.
Yeah.
That's what this project started with. Like, how do we say that here in Columbus we don't throw things away, we find new lives for them.
Right.
And there's definitely another project after this
It's a
thing.
thematic parallel to Columbus in some ways, you know, this reinvigoration of things. So.
That's good.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. Do you how are you liking Columbus? What do you think?
I really like this town. Yeah. I mean, I hope that. I guess I really hope that the public engages the pieces. I mean, all of the work here, and that there's enough enthusiasm to keep it going for multiple years, and really that it's not something. It's not a short-term thing, because there really is an important legacy here, and it needs to be relevant.
And I think it's interesting that you brought up the Columbus Way as well. That's something that you could really see. And I mean, I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. It was a book that was written by a guy named Randy Tucker that sort of, it's not an architectural book, but it's almost all of it is about architectural projects, but it's about the process behind them, sort of the collaborations of these different entities, which I think informs all of these collaborations for Exhibit Columbus.
Yeah.
I wondered if that is something that, I mean, it sounds like it's something that you really noticed in this project.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody said it, like at every meeting. Yeah, at the beginning of the meeting, you know, it's the Columbus Way. And so we were wondering, you know, how, I mean, honestly, like how to test it out. Like, is this, because it describes, the Columbus Way describes this can-do attitude of the local community, but it also describes like their sort of congenial nature, their, you know, the fact that when they agree to do something, it gets done, and you know that construction projects are really difficult. They test, construction really tests people. It's something that could, you know, bring people together or really tear them apart. Construction is this daunting human task that that, you know, produces our civilization's most soaring edifices, but it also has the capacity to produce a lot of damage to the environment and to communities. And so it's a double-edged sword. And so the Columbus Way was like, okay, if it's really there, then it will do what's right. It'll bring people together. It'll have sort of fair practices with both people and materials. And what we found was, yeah, it is there. That the people that we dealt with, Bybee Stone, Taylor Brothers Construction, Exhibit Columbus, all the local people that got behind it, the sponsors, they were open. They were receptive to our ideas. I would say there's another aspect of the Columbus Way, which something I learned, is that there's like a guarded optimism or enthusiasm really going in. It's like in the beginning, every meeting, there's a kind of, you know, there's somewhat of an uncertainty, but it's very real, and we can attest to it that the Columbus Way really works.
You're going to put how many tons in the ground? So, and I'd like to think that the Columbus Way is not unique to Columbus, hopefully, for the rest of us. But certainly here, this whole project, Exhibit Columbus itself, this project and so many of the other projects, just would not have happened without those kinds of positive aspects you're speaking of.
I guess we're out of time, but I want to end on what was the quote that it was David Doubt said to you when you showed him the project? After they won the commission, they won the commission. It was time to build it. It was real. So they approached Taylor Brothers Construction and David Doubt. What did he say to you?
He said, "Well, aren't you the dog that caught the car?" I think we hired him right there.
Well, thanks a lot, and congratulations on the car and everything.
Yeah, thanks a lot.